Today, we stand alone, surveying a planet where Homo sapiens is the sole surviving human species. But that isolation is a recent development. For the vast majority of our existence, we shared the stage with a vibrant ensemble of other human varieties. Around 300,000 years ago, our world was fresher, more untamed, and brimming with far greater variety than the one we inhabit. If you could roam those ancient lands, you'd cross paths with at least 8 additional types of humans, each pursuing their own existence alongside ours. Certain ones towered above us, while others reached only to our hips. Some boasted brains surpassing ours in size, and others relied on unique forms of cognition to thrive. Spanning from the icy plains of northern regions to the lush southern isles, human presence formed not a solo melody, but a rich harmony. Picture yourself on a shoreline that extended well beyond modern bounds, with ocean levels dropped by 120 meters. In Europe, robust forms endowed with immense power, huddled by flames within profound cavern networks carved from limestone. These Neanderthals, designed to withstand the relentless grip of glacial eras, had called those territories home for thousands of years and would persist long prior to our arrival. Meanwhile, in Africa's southern reaches, another narrative plays out. A diminutive group, Homo naledi, navigates shadowy, constricted underground passages with an agility beyond our comprehension. Measuring scarcely 5 feet in height, their hands mirror ours, yet their builds reveal a history of scaling primordial forests. To the east, along Java's waterways, the earliest of our kin still roamed. Homo erectus, who had traversed the globe for almost 2 million years, had perfected the use of flames and lithic tools well ahead of our branch's emergence. On a remote Indonesian speck, natural selection was crafting a distinctive form. Homo floresiensis, dubbed the hobbits, were compact, resourceful, and tough, pursuing miniature elephants in landscapes that strike us as mythical but were utterly authentic. High in Tibet's rugged peaks, the enigmatic Denisovans were acclimating to sparse oxygen, imprinting traces in the DNA of contemporary groups that endure to this day. Even further embedded in today's genetic makeup lurks evidence of unnamed spectral branches, lineages yet to be identified, but who trod the identical soil beneath identical skies. Such was reality, an intricate thicket of human forms rather than a linear progression. We weren't the predestined endpoint. We emerged as just another offshoot in Africa, untried and ordinary. Survival was no certainty. Neanderthals wielded superior intellects. Homo erectus displayed remarkable stamina. The hobbits embodied toughness, yet now we persist in solitude, the final echoes in a deserted hall. The puzzle lingering in that void boils down to one query. What transpired? How did a globe overflowing with human multiplicity shrink to the realm of a single kind? This tale chronicles those predecessors, the era when solitude was unknown. Before delving into their individual stories, we confront a core inquiry. What truly constitutes humanity? Not philosophically, but biologically. What distinguishes the Homo genus from prior ancestors? Long ago, the response appeared straightforward. Intelligence, measured by expansive skull volume as the entry to our order. Yet our planet delights in upending assumptions. Findings like the diminutive yet skilled artisans on Flores or the ceremonial practices of the small-brained Homo naledi in South Africa upended those notions. We've come to see that human essence defies reduction to one measure, such as neural volume. It's not merely bipedalism, which earlier forebears achieved eons back. Nor is it solely tool-making, a skill shared by avians and apes. Rather, humanity emerges as a cluster of attributes and blend of physical form, conduct, and versatility. It encompasses dwellers of Arctic chills and flourishers in equatorial heats. It spans fire pioneers and arboreal ascenders. The concept proves wider, more chaotic, and profoundly richer than earlier views allowed. Natural selection doesn't stride purposefully toward a fixed aim. It doesn't always favor the mightiest or the cleverest. Frequently, it spares the fortuitous, those positioned advantageously amid climatic upheavals or who devised means to endure amid scarcity. Our presence stems not from fate, but from our limb on the evolutionary arbor clinging firm as others successively yielded to temporal pressures. With that foundation, let's rewind the chronicle. Let's encounter the perseverer, the rover, the pioneer who laid groundwork for all that ensued, the lineage that departed Africa and kept migrating ceaselessly, Homo erectus. Nearly 2 million years ago, the initial humans ventured beyond Africa. This occurred well before your kind came into being, prior to the appearance of Neanderthals and long before "zero" took on any shape close to what we recognize today. That trailblazer was Homo erectus, whose exodus from the cradle of their origins marked one of the most triumphant expansions in the saga of our genus. As other groups emerged and faded within the borders of one landmass, Erectus ventured far and wide, adjusting to environments that stretched from lush tropics to cooler groves, from fertile river basins to seaside expanses. They weren't the largest-brained of early humans, nor did they lead in crafting sophisticated tools. Yet, they held a quality that might have outweighed both: endurance. Homo erectus persisted for almost 1.9 million years, a duration so immense it overshadows the full timeline of Homo sapiens by ninefold. Should we match their longevity, another 1.6 million years await us. But considering how we've handled shifting climates and dwindling supplies, that's probably wishful thinking. In stark contrast, Erectus rode out glacial epochs and warmer intervals, eruptions from volcanoes and prolonged dry spells, the ascent and decline of myriad other species, all the while holding ground in Africa and Asia. The oldest remains hail from East Africa, clocking in at about 1.9 million years old, where they coexisted with fellow early hominins like Homo habilis and Paranthropus boisei. Taller than their ancestors, with extended legs and reduced arm length, their physique at last broke free from the lingering bonds of a partly arboreal existence. Bipedal locomotion wasn't a halfway measure anymore. It defined their approach. Those limbs propelled them from Africa into uncharted territories, bridging into the Arabian Peninsula before branching across Asia, extending eastward to Java and northward to the Caucasus. By 1.8 million years ago, Erectus had settled in modern-day Republic of Georgia, with remains from the Dmanisi site showing a group that was more compact and diverse than subsequent Erectus bands, hinting that the lineage kept evolving amid its dispersal from Georgia. Certain bands headed east to China, where they later earned the label Peking Man, while others ventured south to Indonesia. They navigated islands via land bridges that surfaced when oceans receded. It was in Java where Erectus mounted its last defense, clinging on until roughly 117. 000 years ago, tens of millennia past their mainland Asian extinction and hundreds of thousands of years after fading from Africa. The community unearthed at the Anandong site near the Solo River embodies the latest and most refined variant of Homo erectus. In the 1930s, excavators found 12 skulls and 2 leg bones there. For years, their antiquity stayed murky, with guesses swinging from 550,000 years to a mere 27,000. Those fresher timelines intrigued because they implied Erectus and Homo sapiens might have shared Southeast Asian spaces, possibly crossing paths in Indonesia's wooded lowlands and streams. Yet, a more precise analysis in 2019 resolved the debate. The Nahandong specimens date between 117,000 and 108,000 years old. Thus, although Erectus and Sapiens overlapped chronologically, they dwelled in separate zones and almost certainly never interacted. By 117,000 years ago, Homo sapiens had been developing in Africa for close to 200,000 years. Still, no signs exist of our kind arriving in Java before about 73,000 years ago, over 35,000 years post the final Erectus departure. This interval isn't mere chance. It underscores how Erectus, for all its prolonged triumphs, couldn't cope with the swift ecological upheavals reshaping Java in the late Pleistocene. Circa 120,000 years ago, weather patterns altered, and the grassy woodlands and grasslands that had sustained Erectus for eons morphed into thick tropical jungles. Erectus, dependent on open-terrain pursuits and wielding a fairly static toolkit, failed to adapt. In mere tens of thousands of years, they vanished. Erectus's prolonged dominance stemmed not from genius or novelty, but from a sturdy reliability. Their average brain size of around 900 cubic centimeters topped that of prior hominins, yet lagged behind successors such as Homo heidelbergensis and Homo sapiens. They fashioned implements, mostly hand axes and cleavers, in the Acheulean style, reliable yet barely altered across more than 1,000,000 years. They harnessed fire, although the precise onset and regularity are still contested, with the oldest firm proof from a site in Israel around 790,000 years ago. Fire allowed them to prepare meals, endure chilly environments, and ward off dangerous animals, thereby broadening the habitats they could occupy. They pursued big prey, collaborated in groups, and probably developed a basic language or its precursor. While proof for this relies on indirect clues, primarily the intricacy of their group dynamics and craftsmanship, their actions clearly showed human-like qualities, despite physical differences. Their heads featured sturdy, thick skulls with prominent brow ridges and an elongated, flattened cranium, without the elevated, curved top seen in subsequent Homo species. Their features jutted out prominently, and they lacked a chin, a trait that wouldn't develop until Homo sapiens appeared. When Homo erectus vanished on Java, the landscape had transformed profoundly. In Africa, Homo sapiens was already venturing forth, equipped with advanced implements, intricate symbolic reasoning, and, possibly, a more adaptable mindset for tackling challenges. In Europe, Neanderthals flourished, ideally suited to the frigid conditions. High in Asia's mountains, Denisovans developed in seclusion, and in southern Africa's caverns, Homo naledi performed a ritual that continues to baffle experts, depositing their deceased in remote, hard-to-reach cavities, the motives for which might forever elude us. Homo erectus, that remarkable survivor and explorer, across 2,000,000 years of Earth's story, missed the ensuing developments. All they bequeathed were skeletons and artifacts strewn over 2 continents, quiet evidence of an existence that spanned vast distances and durations. They pioneered the exodus from Africa, pioneered fire's use, and showed that humankind could flourish far from its origins. Yet they weren't the final chapter. Ultimately, they didn't persist. If Homo erectus embodied the ultimate nomad, Homo heidelbergensis served as the pivotal forebear, the shared root linking the three most triumphant human branches that would rule the globe for the ensuing 500,000 years. This group arose about 700,000 years ago, probably descending from later Homo erectus groups in Africa, and by 500,000 years ago had dispersed widely across the Old World, including Europe, Western Asia, and potentially Eastern Asia regions. The remains in those eastern areas are still unclear, but Homo heidelbergensis wasn't a monolithic group. It comprised diverse local forms united by sufficient shared physical traits to classify them, at least temporarily, as one category. The initial specimen linked to this group surfaced in 1907 close to the German city of Heidelberg, where laborers in a quarry uncovered a huge mandible from no extant person, and unlike any prior find. The bone was vast and robust, missing a chin entirely. However, its teeth were notably compact and contemporary appearing. This mix of attributes hinted at a midpoint between archaic Homo erectus and later Neanderthals. Otto Schoetensack, the German scholar who analyzed it, dubbed it Homo heidelbergensis and suggested it as an ancient European forerunner, unaware of its key role in humanity's evolutionary tale. In the years that followed, additional remains surfaced throughout Africa and Europe, each contributing to the enigma. A cranium from Broken Hill, Zambia, boasting massive brows and dense bones, was first termed Rhodesian man, but now ranks as an African heidelbergensis. Fragments from Petrolona, Greece, Arago, France, and an impressive array from Cima de los Huesos, Spain, all displayed the signatures of this extensive, diverse lineage. What bound them was a brain volume averaging 1,200 cubic centimeters, notably bigger than that of Erectus yet shy of the peaks in Neanderthals and present-day people. Their crania kept robust brow arches and solid vault walls, echoes of Erectus heritage, but the rear portion started curving, and though the visage still protruded, it was milder than in predecessors. Homo heidelbergensis pioneered the Levallois method, an advanced stoneworking approach demanding foresight and grasp of stone's breaking patterns. Distinct from Erectus's basic hand axes, crafted by repeatedly chipping flakes from a nucleus until the form took shape, Levallois involved prepping the core deliberately, configuring it so one precise strike yielded a flake of exact dimensions and form. This yielded keener, more effective implements and revealed cognitive depth, implying they anticipated multiple stages, envisioning the end result prior to starting. They excelled as hunters, too, a fact borne out by the wooden spears unearthed at Schöningen in Germany, which date to about 400,000 years ago. Far from mere pointed branches, these were precisely made implements, weighted for optimal balance and throw, with the center of mass aligned to boost both range and precision. Horse remains found nearby, marked by cuts from stone tools, indicate that Homo heidelbergensis pursued substantial prey and achieved notable triumphs in the hunt. They incorporated fire into their practices as well, shown by signs of deliberate fires at locations throughout their territories, such as fireplaces in Israel going back almost 800,000 years. It's unclear if Homo heidelbergensis had true language, yet the intricacy of their implements, the teamwork needed for collective pursuits and traces of extensive trade routes, sourcing stones from quarries many kilometers distant, all imply a form of interaction, surpassing basic signals or sounds. Even if they lacked language as you know it today, with its layered rules and boundless potential, they might have used a proto-language, one that could transmit practical details but without the full recursive structure of modern tongues. Roughly 400,000 years ago, changes stirred among Homo heidelbergensis groups. Long-standing regional variations intensified, influenced by landscapes, weather patterns, and the reality that distant communities seldom mixed. In Europe, local populations started developing features that would characterize Neanderthals: more compact, robust frames for the chill, expanded nasal passages to heat incoming cold air. And a cranial shift highlighting the occipital bun at the skull's rear. Around that time, certain European remains, especially from Cima de los Huesos, already resembled Neanderthals more than their Homo heidelbergensis forebears, hinting at an emerging divide, though not fully realized. In Africa, evolution followed a separate path. Those Homo heidelbergensis groups kept slenderer limbs and lighter frames, traits fitting for warm, tropical or semi-tropical environments, where shedding heat was key over conserving it. Gradually, these African lines gave rise to Homo sapiens in a drawn-out process with debated precise dates. By 300,000 years ago, the first bones identifiable as anatomically modern humans surfaced in Morocco and Ethiopia, featuring taller, more globular skulls that were slimmer than their heidelbergensis predecessors while holding on to certain primitive traits. At the same time, in Asia, a further offshoot was emerging discreetly. Proof is limited, leaning more on DNA than bones, but it points to some Homo heidelbergensis venturing east into Central and Eastern Asia, where they developed apart into the Denisovans, a group unknown to researchers until a lone finger bone turned up in a Siberian cave in 2010. Denisovans mingled genetically with Neanderthals and initial Homo sapiens, imprinting their DNA in today's people, especially in Melanesia and Tibet. Yet their look stays enigmatic, as no full skeleton has come to light. By 200,000 years ago, Homo heidelbergensis as a unified kind had essentially disappeared, not via wipeout, but evolution. The line didn't end. It branched into three, each carrying elements of the original heritage and tailoring them to regional demands. In Europe, it turned into Neanderthals. In Africa, into Homo sapiens. In Asia, into Denisovans. These three kinds would rule Earth for the following 150,000 years. Overlapping eras and territories at times, interbreeding now and then, clashing occasionally, or just sharing the world side by side. So Homo heidelbergensis wasn't a failed path but a pivotal junction. It marked the final era when one human form bridged vast lands and carried the promise of fresh forms. Post-Homo heidelbergensis, no single species would span the globe like that, linking Africa, Europe, and Asia in one thread. Divergence took over, with focused adaptations, leading eventually to a gradual return to just one enduring kind, yours. Yet 300,000 years ago, such an end was anything but assured. The planet teemed with human varieties, and Homo heidelbergensis had only just divided into three. The scene was prepared. The actors stood ready. What unfolded would decide which path thrived and which slipped into obscurity, recalled solely through buried remains and echoes in the genes. 300,000 years ago, humanity hit a high point of variety. This era marked the greatest variety of homogeneous forms in its entire 2 million-year span. Far from the messy scramble that diversity often implies, with rival species crowding the same territories and vying for identical provisions. It reflected a deliberate division and adaptation. Each branch claimed its unique habitat, suited to specific weather patterns and regions of the livable planet. The landscape had divided them up, creating space for all, at least temporarily. Across Europe, the heirs of Homo heidelbergensis were evolving into Neanderthals. Their physiques were already reshaping for frigid conditions. Compact arms and legs, robust torsos, and nasal passages, shaped to heat frigid breaths before they hit the chest. They dwelled in karst caverns and cliffside nooks throughout France, Spain, Germany, and the Balkans, pursuing reindeer and bison using timber spears, and mastering flames with such skill that it hinted at a tradition stretching back millennia. Their implements showed advanced craftsmanship. Their communities held strong bonds, and the cranial capacities from later discovered remains ranked as the biggest among all humankinds. In Africa, Homo sapiens was rising from its Homo heidelbergensis roots, but the shift remained incomplete, lingering for roughly another century. The first of your kind displayed some fully modern traits in build: taller brows, globular heads, flatter visages. Yet they clung to plenty of primitive elements, so spotting one in a contemporary crowd might make you pause before deeming it entirely like us. They roamed in tight-knit groups, shifting with the seasons over terrains from coastal Mediterranean shores to elevated plains, tweaking their equipment and pursuit methods to fit each new setting. As versatile foragers in a realm ruled by experts, they stood out. That adaptability, seemingly ordinary then, would later tip the scales. Deep in the east, amid Central Asia's peaks and gorges, Denisovans flourished in seclusion. Their path had diverged from Neanderthals around 400,000 years prior. Details on their looks remained scarce, with bones limited to scraps, a phalanx, several molars, a mandible fragment unearthed on the Tibetan highlands. Still, their genetic legacy reveals mastery of harsh terrains. Certain Denisovan groups developed variants for better oxygen use in thin air, an edge that persists in today's Tibetans and Sherpas. Some ventured southward to milder zones, mingling with nascent Homo sapiens and imprinting DNA in natives of Melanesia, Australia, and the Philippines. Off Indonesia's Java shore, Homo erectus neared its endgame. They persisted in hunts along the Solo River, a habit unbroken for over 1 million years, oblivious to the environmental changes unfolding. The grassy woods and grasslands that had fed erectus for ages were yielding to thick jungle cover, and with their steadfast tech and dependence on known game, they couldn't pivot fast enough. In mere tens of thousands of years, they vanished, the final holdouts of a line that once covered 2 landmasses. On lesser isles dotting Southeast Asia, odder developments unfolded. Flores hosted a human group that had miniaturized through island effects, dwindling across hundreds of millennia to just 1 meter high, with noggins rivaling a chimp's. Homo floresiensis likely reached there some 700,000 years back, perhaps from erectus stock, and coped with scarce sustenance by shrinking to need less. Even with modest intellects, they crafted refined lithic gear and tracked the isle's dwarf mammoths, proving smarts aren't just about volume. Parallel shifts brood on Luzon, but fossils are scant. Isolated dentals, bits of digits and phalanges, sufficient to confirm Homo luzonensis existed, yet too few to detail its ways or form. Down in southern Africa's depths, inside a cavern network untouched by us until 2013, Homo naledi pulled off a feat that puzzles experts still. This compact-framed, modest-minded type, with dexterous grips and endurance-suited souls, somehow traversed pitch-black tight tunnels to deposit deceased kin in remote hollows. It's still unclear whether these actions represented deliberate burials, ceremonial practices, or some other form of conduct, but their occurrence alone upends long-held views on the abilities of small-brained hominins. Homo naledi possessed a brain size of just 500 cubic centimeters. Nevertheless, assuming the archaeological findings hold up, this group displayed symbolic activities that could easily fit with those of far more robust species. Adding to the intrigue were the so-called ghost lineages, detectable solely via genetic analysis, faint echoes in the DNA of contemporary humans, suggesting encounters with unidentified hominin groups that we've yet to unearth or might never locate. Genetic material pulled from the remains of sub-Saharan Africans reveals signs of mixing with ancient humans who branched off from the primary Homo line hundreds of thousands of years back. However, no skeletal remains have aligned with these DNA clues. These enigmatic humans clearly existed, cohabiting in Africa with early Homo sapiens, occasionally exchanging genes that persist in today's populations. Their identity, appearance, habitats, all these details stay shrouded in uncertainty. Resolution might come only if suitable fossils surface in the proper spots and align with the correct timelines. Such was the landscape around 300,000 years ago. At minimum, 9 hominin species, likely more, each unmistakably human in a general way, yet distinct enough that any encounter would reveal the stranger as profoundly alien. Certain ones boasted enormous brains and advanced societies, others managed with diminutive brains on isolated islands. Some interred their deceased deep in caverns. Some ventured out of Africa without circling back. Some stayed put forever. Each was probing in its unique manner the essence of humanity. And for a fleeting geological instant, these diverse explorations unfolded in parallel. None foresaw the impending close of their era, nor that in merely 260,000 more years, just a single lineage would endure, that the once lush branching thicket of evolution would soon be trimmed to one solitary trunk. They couldn't anticipate it, since natural selection doesn't reveal its plans, and vanishing doesn't herald its arrival until the deed is done. The real puzzle isn't their potential for persistence. It's why just one triumphed. Neanderthals weren't meant to be your kin. When that initial skeleton emerged from a limestone cavern in Germany's Neander Valley back in 1856, scientists scrutinized the prominent brow ridges, sturdy frame, and oddly bowed extremities. Many deemed it a relic of antiquity, something primal, possibly a whole separate species that had come and gone eons before Homo sapiens set foot on the planet. The notion that this being could share a tight bond with Europeans, coexist with fully modern humans, or even mate with them, struck experts as absurd. But in the ensuing 150 years, as additional remains surfaced from grottos throughout Europe and Western Asia, perceptions evolved. Neanderthals turned out to be close relatives, not remote kin, divided by millions of years. They split from a shared forebear as lately as 400,000 years ago, thriving for tens of thousands of years. In Europe, they outshone Homo sapiens in endurance. Neanderthals arose from Homo heidelbergensis groups that had inhabited the continent for hundreds of thousands of years. slowly tailoring themselves to the severe ice-bound environments that gripped much of the Middle and Late Pleistocene. Glacial epochs waxed and waned in rhythms spanning tens of thousands of years, and Neanderthals honed themselves to weather every one. Their physiques were compact and muscular, featuring shorter arms and legs plus wider trunks than those of today's people, a configuration that cut down exposed skin and trapped warmth against bitter cold. Their sinuses were vast, crafted to heat and moisten icy incoming air prior to lung contact, with forward-thrusting faces to house those expansive nasal structures. Their entire build whispered of frigid existence, streamlined, specialized, polished across vast stretches of time. Their brains surpassed yours in volume, clocking in at about 1,500 cubic centimeters versus the 1,400 cubic centimeters norm for modern humans. That detail ought to quash any leftover image of Neanderthals as crude simpletons, despite such caricatures lingering through much of the 1900s and popping up now and then in media. While brain volume doesn't equate perfectly to smarts, as seen in Homo naledi and Homo floresiensis, it matters, and Neanderthals sported not just bigger brains but ones structured unlike yours. Their occipital regions, key for vision, loomed larger in proportion, whereas the frontal areas tied to higher thinking and foresight were a touch reduced. It's hard to conclude definitively whether these brain differences gave them advantages or drawbacks in particular mental challenges, but the evidence points to cognitive styles that diverged noticeably from those of today's humans. Neanderthals proved highly proficient at crafting tools, fashioning items within the Mousterian tradition. Think scrapers, points, and precisely contoured hand axes, all achieved through the Levallois method, handed down from their Homo heidelbergensis forebears. Certain Neanderthal communities pushed boundaries even more, devising implements with clear regional distinctions and creative twists, which implies they maintain separate cultural practices shared across the years. In the southwest of France, they developed blade tools that outshone ancestral designs in both lightness and keenness. In Italy, they worked with obsidian, that tricky volcanic glass needing real expertise to shape, but delivering cutting edges superior to steel. Meanwhile, in the Levant, where Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens shared the same landscapes, each group produced stone tools so alike that sorting one from the other relies on more than just archaeological finds alone. Fire played a pivotal role in Neanderthal existence, far beyond mere heating. It shaped their routines and outlined their campsites. Findings from European caves reveal how they constructed hearths thoughtfully, stacking stones to hold the blaze and situating them for optimal warmth spread and fume escape. They prepared meals over these flames, tenderizing hardy plants for easier digestion and pulling extra energy from animal flesh. Beyond that, fire likely served additional roles like toughening spear shafts, warding off wild beasts, or maybe even drawing communities together for evening rituals. Mastering fire marks a key trait of the Homo genus, yet Neanderthals turned it into something akin to mastery. What truly sets Neanderthals apart from prior humankinds, and what stands out most, is proof of their symbolic thinking. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, digs from the 1950s revealed a Neanderthal man's remains laid out on purpose in a shallow pit, potentially with flowers nearby, as hinted by pollen traces in the dirt around him. This burial's meaning has sparked decades of debate, with critics claiming bees, rodents, or breezes might have carried in the pollen. Still, setting aside the flowers, the deliberate interment carries weight on its own. Such an act shows they viewed death as more than just a natural end, treating the departed as a person deserving memory, not fodder for scavengers. Newer finds bolster arguments for Neanderthal symbolism. In Spain, artwork in caves over 64,000 years old, dated via overlying mineral layers predating Homo sapiens' European arrival, gets linked to Neanderthals. These pieces seem basic today, mainly geometric forms and hand outlines, but making them reveals a drive to depict and leave meaningful signs on their surroundings. In Croatia, Neanderthals turned eagle talons into adornments, linking them into what looks like necklaces or armbands. And in France, they etched designs on bones and antlers, though experts still puzzle over if these held aesthetic, practical, or deeper significance. Debates on Neanderthal language rage on without resolution. Their hyoid bone, supporting the tongue and voice box, mirrors yours in form, indicating the physical setup for speaking existed. Plus, genetic research lately uncovered that Neanderthals had a FOXP2 gene variant almost matching the modern human one, linked to precise movements for articulation. FOXP2 glitches today lead to major speech disorders. Sharing this variant suggests Neanderthals at minimum had the bodily potential for language, even if their version differed from how you employ it. Hard to know for sure. After all, their neural setups varied, their bands stayed compact, and the pressures on whatever communication they had might have molded it into something unfamiliar to you. For over 300,000 years, they endured in Europe, surviving repeated ice epochs and shifting environments from mild woodland phases in warmer spells to icy plains in the deep freezes. Their numbers stayed modest, likely peaking at just tens of thousands. Distributed sparsely over an expansive region stretching from Spain's Atlantic shores to Siberia's Altai mountains, they pursued woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, reindeer, horses, and bison through ambush techniques and group efforts that demanded foresight and teamwork. Certain Neanderthal locations reveal signs of communal drives where whole herds were funneled off cliffs or into trapped valleys, indicating they possessed the scale of organized hunting that experts formerly thought exclusive to Homo sapiens. Even with their adjustments and achievements, Neanderthals started fading about 50,000 years ago, right as Homo sapiens pushed from Africa into Europe. The species coexisted for a minimum of 10,000 years, maybe more, and intermingled during this period. Today, genetic research shows that every non-African person inherits 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA from meetings in the Middle East or Southern Europe, tens of thousands of years back. Such mixing wasn't widespread and might have involved just a handful of instances, yet it etched a lasting imprint on the human genetic code. Around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthal groups shrank to scattered survivors in southern Spain and the Balkans. By 39,000 years ago, those final remnants vanished too. Debates persist over their disappearance, with shifting climates, rivalry from Homo sapiens, and illnesses all suggested as roles. In reality, it's probably a mix of these, worsened by their limited divided numbers, which left them exposed to any setback. They didn't fade due to weakness. The planet shifted and they couldn't adapt swiftly enough. What endures isn't just their skeletons, but the DNA they shared, lingering in billions alive now. Those sequences influence aspects like immunity to disease, pigmentation of the skin, the contour of your nostrils, even your endurance for discomfort. Neanderthals aren't gone like Homo erectus is gone. They merged, blended into the growing Homo sapiens crowds. their heritage thinned out but never erased completely. Thus, they're part of us still, woven into the essence of humanity, a sign that you're not solely one type, but a blend of ancient lines that roamed separately long ago. Among humankind's from 300,000 years past, the Denisovans stand as the most mysterious, not for lacking proof of their lives, far from it, but because their remnants are so broken and dispersed that assembling a clear image of them poses a major puzzle in paleoanthropology. In contrast to Neanderthals with thousands of fossils and a solid grasp of their build, Denisovans come from mere scraps of bone, small enough to cup in one hand. A finger from an adolescent girl, several molars, a jaw fragment unearthed on Tibet's barren highland. That's our sole, tangible record. Still, from these modest pieces, researchers pulled off something remarkable. A full genetic profile, exposing a branch as separate and vital as the Neanderthals. This group crossed with both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, scattering genetic echoes across folks from Siberia to South Pacific Isles. The initial Denisovan relic surfaced in 2008, found by Russian diggers in Denisova Cave, amid the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, a stark, isolated spot bordering Russia, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and China. The site saw sporadic use over tens of thousands of years, its layers holding stone implements and beast remains hinting at refuge for early peoples. But which ones exactly stayed unclear. From the lowest strata came a minuscule finger bone, thumbnail-sized, from a young female who perished 30,000 to 50,000 years prior. Initially, it looked ordinary. Another bit amid Neanderthal and modern human finds. Yet when DNA experts pulled and analyzed its sequence, and surprise emerged. The material didn't align with Neanderthals or Homo sapiens. It represented a different sort altogether. The full sequence indicated this female stemmed from a line that parted from Neanderthals about 400,000 years earlier, near when each split from Homo sapiens forebears. Named for the Siberian cave that yielded their initial remains, the Denisovans formed a sibling lineage to the Neanderthals, connected by a closer shared ancestor than either had with us modern humans. Even so, they had branched off and developed on their own for hundreds of thousands of years, tailoring themselves to varied habitats and weather patterns, unlike those familiar to the Neanderthals. Over time, these changes made them genetically separate enough to qualify as a distinct species, or certainly a profoundly isolated branch. Uncovering this branch sparked just as many mysteries as it resolved. The DNA offered irrefutable proof of their existence, so the real puzzles centered on their habitats, their physical forms, and their dealings with fellow human groups. The Siberian site yielded scant hints. Tools unearthed alongside the finger bone proved ordinary, impossible to tell apart from Neanderthal or early Homo sapiens workmanship, shedding no light on any unique Denisovan traditions or innovations. Subsequent finds, 3 molars and a toe bone from that same cave, along with a mandible, unearthed in Tibet much later, were all too incomplete to piece together a Denisovan's appearance. Still, the oversized molars hinted at sturdy builds and potentially hefty frames in those individuals. The 2019 Tibetan jaw fragment, recovered above 3,000 meters on the plateau, stood out among Denisovan relics despite its partial state, limited to a section of lower jaw with 2 molars intact. Its importance stemmed not only from the thin air, oxygen there about 30% scarcer than at sea level, but from proteins pulled from the specimen, verifying it came from a Denisovan who thrived at least 160,000 years back. That finding extended the record of Denisovan presence in Asia's high country by over 100,000 years, implying this group had mastered one of Earth's harshest terrains well ahead of any Homo sapiens ventures there. Genetics bolsters the notion of such elevation tolerance. Today's Tibetans and Sherpas possess an EPAS1 allele that boosts oxygen handling in thin air, curbing altitude illness and enabling endurance in spots where typical humans falter. Rare among lowlanders and nearly missing from Europeans or Africans, this allele prevails in Tibetans, and studies confirm it didn't arise afresh in them. Rather, it traces back to Denisovans transferred via mixing that happened scores of millennia ago as early Homo sapiens pushed into Asia and crossed paths with highland Denisovan communities, long established there. Such hybridization wasn't confined to Tibet. Denisovan traces pop up unexpectedly across Asia and into the Pacific, distant from that original Siberian discovery. Folks in Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, and indigenous Australians harbor 4 to 6% Denisovan ancestry, far outpacing the Neanderthal input in Europeans or Asians. These genetic echoes point to encounters in the distant past, likely 50,000 to 40,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens trekking through Southeast Asia mingled with Denisovans, folding their traits into our growing numbers. Certain inherited elements offered edges in fresh territories Homo sapiens were settling, adaptations for immunity, energy use, and even breath-holding, potentially accounting for why the Bajau of the Philippines, prolific divers who hunt submerged, bear Denisovan-linked variants. The spread suggested by this DNA footprint is immense, with contributions to groups from Siberian tundras to Tibetan heights, Melanesian isles, and Australian expanses. Denisovans evidently spanned Asia broadly, from icy extremes to steamy tropics, uplands to shores. Remarkably, for such a wide domain, they've bequeathed hardly any tangible traces, no full skeletons, unambiguous dig sites, signature implements, or artwork unmistakably theirs. They linger as spectral figures, revealed mainly by their lingering code. Without more bones, core inquiries into their looks, habits, and ways of life stay unresolved. Insights trickle in, mostly from DNA comparisons and analogies. Evidence of prominent molars points to the possibility that Denisovans possessed sturdy jaws and potentially substantial builds, similar in stature to Neanderthals or maybe even surpassing them. Variations within their genetic code reveal that they weren't a uniform group, but instead comprised various subgroups isolated by distance and eras, with some diverging from each other to a degree comparable to the split between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Moreover, the Denisovan genetic profile bears signs of mixing not only with Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, but also with some unidentified ancient human lineage that branched off from the primary Homo evolutionary path much sooner. This could represent a surviving group of Homo erectus that endured in Eastern Asia well beyond the species' extinction in other areas. Should this view hold true, Denisovans would themselves be hybrids, incorporating DNA from diverse branches and fitting into a human evolutionary framework that's considerably more intricate than a straightforward tree diagram implies. By around 40,000 years ago, like the Neanderthals, the Denisovans had vanished as a separate group. Yet, the precise timing and circumstances of their disappearance remain obscure. No Denisovan remains have been dated
younger than 40,000 years, and there's no definitive archaeological proof of their existence afterward. However, genetic data hints that they might have hung on in certain areas beyond that point, holding out in remote Asian enclaves even as Homo sapiens expanded throughout the region. If they endured longer, no evidence of it has surfaced so far. Their ultimate demise or blending into the contemporary human genetic mix continues to be among the persistent enigmas about this elusive group. What's undeniable is that Denisovans existed, that they ranged widely, and that they played a major role in shaping the ancestry of today's humans, with fresh insights emerging continually. Each newly sequenced genome or scrutinized ancient bone sheds further light on their identity and habitats. It's conceivable that upcoming digs in Asia might yield more intact skeletons, enabling researchers at last to piece together the physical form of a Denisovan. For now, they linger as spectral figures, detectable mainly through their DNA, elusive in nearly all other respects, a testament to how much deeper and more intertwined the tale of humanity is than fossils by themselves can show. Islands tend to foster surprising evolutionary adaptations in living things. This holds for avian species, reptiles, bugs, and even larger animals like mammals, humans included. Isolation on islands, coupled with scarce provisions and the absence of major threats, frequently drives populations toward reduced dimensions, a process termed island dwarfism. Elephants dwindle down to pony proportions. Hippos shrink to sheep-like scale. Deer transform into rabbit-sized beings. The reasoning is simple. Compact frames demand fewer calories, and in environments where sustenance is limited, those with lower needs stand a better chance of thriving and passing on their traits. Across millennia, whole communities can diminish markedly, shifting incrementally, until a downsized iteration of a formerly massive form appears. That's precisely what unfolded on Flores, an Indonesian island, though it caught everyone off guard until September 2003, when a joint Australian-Indonesian team, digging in a limestone cavern named Liang Bua, unearthed an almost intact skeleton, embedded in layers of deposit dating back tens of thousands of years. The remains were diminutive, much tinier than a typical grown human's, leading the first hunch that it was a youngster's. Yet, upon detailed cleaning and study, it was evident this wasn't juvenile at all. The dentition was complete and considerably abraded. The cranial seams were joined, and the hip bones displayed the typical adult female configuration. She had reached maturity before passing, standing just about 1 meter tall, akin to today's 3-year-old. Her brain size, gauged by the skull's internal capacity, came to roughly 400 cubic centimeters, tinier than any documented adult hominins and more akin to Australopithecines from epochs millions of years prior. The find was so startling, clashing so sharply with established notions of human development, that numerous experts at first rejected it as evidence of a new species. Maybe this person had microcephaly, a condition causing unusually petite brains and heads. Maybe it stemmed from some uncommon hereditary issue hindering development. Maybe it was merely an anomaly, one odd case that ended up interred in a cave and unearthed by chance. But these theories faltered when the Liangbua digs turned up remains from no fewer than 12 other people. Every one of those bones belonged to notably diminutive adults, all from layers dated between about 100,000 and 60,000 years back, with hints that the group could have persisted even further into time. This wasn't just one odd outlier. It represented a whole community, a separate kind of human that thrived on Flores for many millennia, and maybe even beyond that. Scientists dubbed them Homo floresiensis, and the media quickly latched onto Hobbit as a catchy label, a term that endured even as certain experts grumbled that it downplayed the find's importance. Fittingly so, given these were truly petite beings in a realm teeming with other bizarrely shrunken fauna. Back when Floresiensis roamed, Flores hosted tiny elephants known as stegodon, stunted cousins of the colossal beasts that lumbered across Asia's mainland, alongside oversized rodents, colossal reptiles, and birds that couldn't fly. Cut off from greater Indonesia for eons by vast watery barriers that stayed intact even at the Ice Age's lowest tides, the island functioned like a natural experiment in evolution, where typical growth patterns twisted under the unique strains of insular existence. The artifacts unearthed near the Floresiensis remains were remarkably advanced, considering their cranial capacity. Crafted with forethought and expertise, these included stone edges, abrading tools, and tips strewn across the cavern strata. Plus, marks on nearby beast bones showed that the residents had carved up prey. Traces of scorched remains and heated earth pointed to fire mastery among Floresiensis, although the proof isn't quite as solid as for Neanderthals or Homo erectus. It's unclear if they actively pursued the dwarf elephants or just picked over their corpses, but their implements were up to the task of handling flesh. Tooth wear on Floresiensis suggests a varied menu blending meats and vegetation. Debate rages over where Homo floresiensis came from. The leading theory holds that they sprang from Homo erectus migrants who arrived on Flores around 700,000 years ago, or possibly sooner, then got stranded, shrinking in stature and intellect over generations due to scarce provisions. In this view, Floresiensis emerged as a miniaturized offshoot of erectus, diverging wildly from continental kin. A rival idea, backed by a few scholars, posits roots in an ancient hominin-like Homo habilis or akin. One that ventured from Africa, well ahead of erectus, and somehow crossed to Southeast Asia. That could account for Floresiensis traits, like wrist bone form and foot ratios, that echo far older ancestors more than erectus. No matter the true backstory, Floresiensis upends a core belief in our evolutionary tale that smarts and brain volume go hand in hand, with progress marching toward bigger minds and sharper wits. Their brains matched a chimp's in scale. Still, they fashioned tools from rock, tamed flames, chased or foraged big game, and endured on a remote land for vast stretches of time. All this implies that cleverness for tackling challenges and adjusting to shifts doesn't hinge solely on neural bulk. Instead, wiring patterns, linkage efficiency, and local survival needs seem every bit as crucial as raw capacity. Pinpointing Homo floresiensis's end is tricky, since the latest Liang-Barua fossils clock in at roughly 60,000 years old. Yet tools linked to them turn up in more recent strata, down to 50,000 years ago. Such finds spark ideas that they lasted into nearer history, potentially crossing paths with the earliest Homo sapiens arrivals on Flores around 50,000 to 40,000 years prior. If contact happened, though, nothing shows it. No DNA traces of mixing in today's people, no digs hinting at exchanges. The hobbits just fade away, their fate. Be it rivalry from arriving sapiens, sickness, or some natural disaster, it stays a mystery. What amps up the oddity of the Floresiensis saga is the chance that their vanishing didn't erase their influence entirely. Today, the people of Flores share oral legends about a diminutive, human-like being known as the Ebu Gogo, portrayed as no bigger than a youngster, furry all over, and chattering in an unintelligible tongue. These accounts describe the creatures dwelling in caverns, pilfering meals from settlements, and mimicking human speech like mimics without grasping the meaning. The narratives claim that villagers eradicated the Ebu Gogo a few hundred years back, herding them into a cavern and suffocating them with flames and fumes. For years, experts in human origins brushed off such lore as mere myth. Yet the unearthing of Homo floresiensis has led a few to take a second look. Might the Ebu Gogo represent a lingering cultural recollection of these island dwellers, a faint remnant of interactions from millennia past, handed down via ages of tales? Proof remains elusive, and the scientific community mostly holds doubts. But the idea persists as an intriguing suggestion that Flores's _2_ endured well beyond what bones reveal. Regardless of whether the Ebu Gogo yarns hold truth, Homo floresiensis's reality stands firm, carrying deep repercussions. As it happens, evolution doesn't always push toward greater intellect or stature in a straight line. Instead, it's shaped by fitting into specific surroundings. At times, shrinking proves the advantageous path over growing. Far from flawed or stalled branches, the Flores hobbits formed a viable lineage that flourished in their habitat for hundreds of thousands of years, outlasting our own Homo sapiens tenure so far. And they managed this with noggins scarcely bigger than a citrus fruit. Such a fact demands we reassess notions of cleverness, humanity, and the diverse routes evolution can take for groups cut off and shaping themselves independently. Unearthing Homo floresiensis on Flores spurred diggers to scrutinize other Southeast Asian isles more intently, hunting evidence that this shrinkage on islands could have spawned further petite human forms nearby. The Philippines, with its vast scatter of over 7,000 isles, severed from Asia's continent for eons, looked ripe for exploration. Sure enough, in 2007, a dig at Callao Cave on Luzon turned up 1-foot bone from what seemed a compact-bodied hominin. Dated to 67,000 years old at minimum, it aligned in time with the latest Homo floresiensis remains. Still, the piece was tiny and vague, defying clear classification. It stayed an oddity for over 10 years, teasing potential without solid answers. That changed in 2019, when the group revealed more finds from the site. Molars, digits from hands and feet, plus a bit of femur, all from no fewer than 3 people, blending traits alien to established humankinds. The molars were compact and straightforward, akin to ours in Homo sapiens. Yet the hand and foot phalanges arched in a manner hinting at tree-scaling prowess. More typical of far older kin, like Australopithecus or primitive Homo, than advanced ones such as Erectus or Sapiens. The foot elements merged archaic and contemporary marks, some echoing floresiensis, while others recalled ancient hominin feet. It formed a jumble, a blend defying tidy slots. After thorough study, the team deemed it a fresh species, dubbing it Homo luzonensis. This find sparked urgent queries, chief among them how Homo luzonensis reached Luzon initially. Flores allowed access from Asia's shores via brief water gaps in low-sea eras, but Luzon never linked via dry land, not even in peak glacial times when oceans fell over 120 meters. Positioned beyond a vast submarine chasm that's blocked passage for ages, Getting there demanded navigating at least 50 kilometers of exposed sea, or perhaps farther by alternate paths. For Homo erectus or its offshoots, that meant remarkable ocean voyaging, beyond what most human origin scholars deemed feasible then. Several theories could explain it. Perhaps Homo luzonensis or forebears didn't plan the trip, but got carried off unwillingly, maybe gripping storm-tossed flotsam or drifting on plant-based floats flushed seaward by deluges. Such unintentional voyages across the sea aren't unheard of in contemporary accounts. Though infrequent, they certainly occur, and across vast timescales spanning hundreds of thousands of years. Even uncommon incidents might repeat several times. Another scenario suggests that ancient people in Southeast Asia possessed greater skills in constructing boats and traversing open waters than experts once thought, meaning the journey to Luzon could have been deliberate, undertaken by communities aware of the dangers yet equipped with the necessary know-how to handle them. Should this hold true, it would extend the timeline for the beginnings of maritime travel by many millennia and compel a fresh look at the abilities of early hominins. The physical features of Homo luzonensis provide scant hints toward determining the accurate interpretation. Its hooked phalanges in the hands and feet indicate that luzonensis maintained tree-climbing prowess, a handy adaptation amid the thick jungle cover of Luzon, where vital sustenance like fruits, seeds, bugs, and avian life lurked high in the branches. This arboreal knack stands out as atypical within the Homo genus, since most lineages starting from Erectus had mostly ditched life in the trees for constant ground-based locomotion. Yet it's not entirely without precedent. Tugenensis and primitive Homo members also kept those bent digits along with related climbing features. If Luzonensis sprang from an initial branch of the genus that departed Africa prior to Erectus, such characteristics could merely echo an age when scaling trees remained a key element of hominin existence. The diminutive dental structure and the slender skeletal frame point to Luzonensis, resembling Floricensis as a petite-bodied form. Precisely how tiny remains unclear absent fuller remains. The pronounced bend in those hand and foot bones has led certain scientists to propose that Luzonensis may have been even more tree-oriented than Floricensis, devoting substantial periods aloft and perhaps even building nests there. While that's conjecture, one undeniable fact emerges. Luzonensis exemplifies how isolation on islands fosters bizarre morphologies, underscoring that the array of human varieties across Southeast Asia in the Middle and later Pleistocene far exceeded prior expectations, thanks to findings from recent decades. The remains of Homo luzonensis proved disappointingly limited. Just 13 fragments have surfaced to date, all unearthed in Callao Cave, and no younger than 67,000 years old, although the surrounding strata haven't received exhaustive digging. Thus, Luzonensis might have persisted on Luzon for far longer. Curiously, no stone artifacts link directly to these bones, despite evidence that Luzonensis's manual dexterity suited it for crafting and employing implements, much like contemporaneous hominin groups who all wielded tools. Perhaps Luzonensis relied on perishables such as bamboo, timber, or shells that decayed without a trace in the digs, or maybe their implements were so rudimentary they blended seamlessly with the random rock chips common in cavern floors. The demise of Homo luzonensis remains a mystery. With the most recent specimens at 67,000 years, the lineage might have vanished prior to Homo sapiens' arrival in the Philippines. or endured further until supplanted or integrated upon our species' entry around 50,000 to 40,000 years back. No DNA traces intermixing Lusonensis and sapiens exist, implying either no encounter, fruitless, hybridization even if they cross paths, or successful unions whose hybrid offspring died out without proliferating. Modern humans have occupied the Philippines for no less than 40,000 years, during which fluctuating sea levels repeatedly drowned and revealed enormous coastal expanses now submerged. Crucial digs illuminating Lusonensis's end might lie underwater, erased by post-glacial inundations. Irrespective of its conclusion, Homo lusonensis illuminates a late Pleistocene island, Southeast Asia, teeming with, at minimum, 2 unique diminutive human types, and likely others, each developing apart on distinct land masses, molding to their surroundings in odd, unforeseen manners. Their very presence upends the outdated view of human development as a straight-line advance from rudimentary to sophisticated, from modest brains to expansive ones, radiating from Africa to everywhere else. Rather than a straight path, this points to human evolution as a tangled, divergent process packed with simultaneous trials, many thriving for hundreds of thousands of years before fading away, all that's left being scattered bones and lingering mysteries. For over 100 years, the tale of human evolution has centered on the growth of the brain. Early ancestors had brains comparable in size to those of today's chimpanzees. Then, across about 2 million years, gradual natural selection for smarts, puzzle-solving skills, and group cooperation expanded and refined those brains to the scale and structure we see in contemporary humans. It's a straightforward and appealing account. Larger brains equaled more intelligent people. Those sharper minds fared better in survival. Thus, evolution preferred the biggest skull sizes. Standard illustrations in textbooks depict this as a tidy lineup of skulls from left to right, each successively bulkier, ending with Homo sapiens and its prominent forehead plus domed cranium. The message is straightforward. What defined us as human was intelligence, and that demanded a hefty brain. But finding Homo floresiensis and Homo lusonensis upended this idea. These groups had brains no bigger than those of Australopithecines, around 400 to 500 cubic centimeters, about the volume of a grapefruit or big orange. Still they crafted stone tools, mastered fire, pursued or gathered big game, and endured for hundreds of thousands of years in tough surroundings. Floresiensis inhabited a remote island with scarce supplies and, while not as fierce as continental threats, real dangers from predators. Lusonensis scaled trees in lush jungles and somehow navigated vast seas to settle an island, never linked to the continent. Far from basic, instinct-driven brutes, they displayed sophisticated behaviors, flexibility, and evolutionary success by key standards. These tiny brain groups demand we rethink brain size's role. The classic perspective assumes cognition ties directly to brain volume within a species line, with bigger ones offering superior computation, storage, and higher-level thinking. That's accurate up to a limit. Sure, brain size links to some intelligence metrics across mammals, yet the link isn't flawless, and outliers show that brain size alone can't measure smarts reliably. Take crows. Their brains tip the scales at just 15 grams, a sliver compared to ours, but they tackle complex puzzles in stages, wield tools, identify specific human faces, and bear grudges against those who've slighted them. Octopuses distribute their brains across their forms instead of cramming them into one hub. Yet they match many backboned animals in ingenuity, slipping out of locked jars, blending into surroundings with eerie accuracy,
and picking up skills by watching. Evidently, what counts isn't raw brain bulk, but how neurons are arranged, the web of links between areas, and the streamlined flow of data. A compact brain, crammed with neurons and smartly linked, can outdo a bulkier, sloppier one. This idea spans creatures from bugs to avians to warm-bloodeds. For Floresiensis and Lusonensis, their modest brains likely met the mental needs of their habitats just fine, especially if structured to emphasize vital abilities like hand-eye finesse for crafting tools, navigation sense for woods or shores, and teamwork for communal life. Energy costs come into play too. Brains guzzle energy, claiming about 20% of a human's overall intake while comprising merely 2% of body weight. On an island short on grub, sustaining a massive brain would strain resources heavily. Selection would boost those thriving and breeding with leaner, thriftier brains that sipped less fuel. That's a core driver of island dwarfism. Smaller frames demand fewer calories. No surprise brains face the same squeeze. Suppose a group of Homo erectus reached the island of Flores, where their brains typically measured around 900 cubic centimeters, and encountered a habitat with limited resources. In such conditions, those with marginally smaller brains would gain an edge in survival, leading to a gradual decrease in the group's average brain volume across countless generations. What's truly striking is how this downsizing didn't lead to simpler behaviors, at least not enough to hinder Homo floresiensis from crafting tools or thriving in their surroundings. The artifacts unearthed at Liangbua aren't rough or basic compared to Middle Pleistocene norms. They're finely crafted items that demand foresight, expertise, and knowledge of stone-breaking mechanics. Producing them points to Homo floresiensis possessing not just the hand-eye coordination to chip away at cores, but also the mental acuity to picture the end result, sequence the blows, and adapt methods to the material's traits. These aren't basic activities. They call for smarts, far exceeding what you'd anticipate from a brain akin to a chimpanzee's. Something similar holds for Homo naledi, the diminutive-brained hominin from South Africa, whose remains turned up deep in a treacherous cave network. Their brains averaged roughly 500 cubic centimeters, much like those of Homo floresiensis. Still, signs indicate they intentionally deposited bodies in the cavern, perhaps as burials, or at least a purposeful way to handle the deceased, beyond mere neglect. If this view holds up, and it's still debated, then Homo naledi practiced ritual or symbolic actions, long assumed to need expansive, sophisticated brains for abstract reasoning. That they might have pulled this off with brains half the size of ours today is profoundly baffling and highlights its gaps in our grasp of how brain volume ties to mental prowess. One explanation could be that the brain power for tool production, fire control, and symbolic expression isn't as intensive as we've believed, and compact brains, if structured right, can handle such feats just fine. Alternatively, Homo floresiensis, Homo lusonensis, and Homo naledi may have carried over neural frameworks from their bigger forebears, pre-configured for these skills. As their brains contracted, the key pathways stayed functional, enabling continued tool use and intricate conduct, even with less total mass. This mirrors tech miniaturization. Bulky old computers once occupied whole rooms, yet today's tiny smartphones outdo them in complexity, thanks to smarter, more efficient designs. We also wonder what these species might have sacrificed, if anything, amid the shrinkage. It's conceivable that Homo floresiensis and Homo naledi lagged behind their bulkier kin in some areas, maybe with reduced language range, simpler social dynamics, or weaker long-term planning. Fossils can't reveal this, though, since they capture only skeletons and implements.
not the inner lives or daily actions that shape them. What's evident is their endurance for hundreds of millennia, outlasting most lineages and dwarfing our own history so far. Thus, the puzzle of tiny brains isn't much of a puzzle if you drop the notion that size alone drives intellect. It underscores evolution's nonlinear path, where greater isn't inherently superior, and local ecological demands can yield unexpected strategies, especially counter to the self-view of a creature like us, centered on topping the intelligence charts. Homo floresiensis, Homo luzonensis, and Homo naledi weren't flops. They were apt responses to their worlds, and their modest brains critique our biases more than their limits. In September 2013, a pair of hobbyist spelunkers probing South Africa's rising star cave wriggled through a tight crawl, known as the Dragon's Back, a sheer drop as slim as 18 centimeters at its tightest, and dropped into a room, untouched by any living person. What lay there, strewn about the ground and locked in the dirt, were bones by the hundreds, maybe thousands, all from an unfamiliar ancient hominin kind. The explorers snapped photos and alerted Lee Berger, a paleoanthropologist from the University of the Witwatersrand, who'd spent years hunting for hominin remains in that region with little to show for it. Berger quickly put together a compact team of experts agile enough to navigate the tight confines of the Dragon's Back. In the following weeks, they carefully unearthed over 1,500 bones from no fewer than 15 individuals, creating one of Africa's biggest troves of hominin fossils discovered in a single spot. Eventually, the species got the name Homo naledi, drawing from the Khoisan term for star, a nod to the rising star cave where the remains turned up. These fossils showed a confusing blend of traits, some strikingly contemporary, others echoing far older phases of human development. Take the hands. They were strikingly similar to ours, featuring curved digits ideal for tree climbing, yet equipped with a thumb and wrist setup, perfect for the precise handling required to craft and wield stone tools. The feet mirrored this modernity, boasting arches and toe alignments that marked Naledi as an efficient endurance trekker, able to cover vast open terrains just like we do today. In contrast, the shoulders and pelvis retained more archaic qualities, akin to those of Australopithecines. The skull, meanwhile, was compact and flattened, housing a brain of around 500 cubic centimeters, about one-third the volume of ours and more, in line with early Homo, or even late Australopithecus. At first, the primitive elements suggested Naledi was an old species, maybe 2 to 3 million years old, living alongside Homo habilis or Australopithecus sediba. Under that view, Naledi would have been an early offshoot in the Homo family tree, one that fizzled out without influencing later human lines. But in 2017, dating via radiometric methods and sediment studies flipped that script entirely. The findings were jaw-dropping. Homo naledi existed from 335,000 to 236,000 years ago, right in the Middle Pleistocene, overlapping with early Homo sapiens, late Homo heidelbergensis, and perhaps the final pockets of Homo erectus in Java. Far from a fossilized throwback to humanity's origins, Naledi was a fresh arrival that persisted into an era when bigger-brained humans had already spread across Africa and farther afield. What truly baffled experts about the rising star find wasn't just the bones, but their surroundings. The room holding them, dubbed the Dinaledi Chamber, sits far underground in the cave network, over 30 meters down, reached only via cramped crawls and steep descents that would test even seasoned spelunkers with today's gear. Nothing indicates a broader route to the surface that could have let creatures tumble in by chance. And the chamber holds no remains from any other animals, no predators, grazers, or scavengers whatsoever. It's solely bones from Homo naledi, spanning all life stages, from babies to seniors. They're strewn about the floor, in patterns hinting at purposeful placement, not flood deposits or predator hauls. The boldest take on this is that Homo naledi was ritually interring its dead, hauling corpses through those pitch-black constricted tunnels to stash them in the Dinaledi chamber as some kind of burial practice. If accurate, that's revolutionary, since intentional burial typically demands advanced symbolic thought and social sophistication beyond what a brain like Naledi's could muster. We modern humans inter our loved ones because we grasp mortality, hold afterlife notions, and value our lost kin enough to follow elaborate cultural rites for their remains. Suggesting a small-brained hominin pulled off something parallel upends core ideas linking brain volume to mental prowess. Other theories exist, though. Maybe the Dinaledi chamber served as a dump site for corpses to shield living spaces from scavengers or illnesses. Or perhaps Naledi, who entered the cave alive, got lost, got stuck, and perished from thirst or hunger. This scenario accounts for the presence of remains from people of various ages, yet it prompts the puzzle of how numerous individuals, across what seems like a prolonged span, could repeatedly commit the identical deadly error by venturing into an evidently hazardous and labyrinthine cave network. Accessing the chamber proves challenging, and there's no clear motive for Homo naledi to have ventured there initially, except perhaps for an intentional objective. In 2022, fresh discoveries added even more layers to the enigma. Experts examining the walls of the Dinaledi chamber identified what looked like intentional engravings, geometric designs etched or incised into the yielding limestone, alongside signs of managed fire, including burned bones and layers of soot. Should these observations hold up and be definitively tied to Homo naledi instead of subsequent human interference, it would indicate that this group wasn't just interring its deceased, but also producing emblematic inscriptions and employing fire for reasons extending past mere heating or food preparation. The consequences would be groundbreaking, revealing that a species whose brain measured only about half that of contemporary humans displayed traits long viewed as signs of sophisticated intelligence and societal development. Critics have voiced reasonable doubts regarding the reading of this data. The cavern has seen visits from modern humans in the past few hundred years, so certain etchings and fire traces might stem from those later visits, rather than Homo naledi's efforts. The chronology of the engravings isn't as firmly established as that of the skeletal remains. Until that ambiguity clears, any assertions about Homo naledi's emblematic practices will stay provisional. The idea of deliberate burials, though intriguing, relies on indirect indicators instead of solid confirmation. Some scientists still argue that atypical natural forces, however odd, might explain the buildup of bones in the Dinaledi chamber. Undeniably established, however, is Homo naledi's existence, its temporal overlap with fellow human lineages, and its notably diminutive brain for a Homo genus member in the Middle Pleistocene. Regardless of whether it possessed symbolic reasoning, practiced funerary rites, harnessed fire, or produced artwork. Such inquiries linger unresolved, destined for ongoing discussion as emerging data surfaces and refined methods for studying the fossils and cavern setting advance. Irrespective of the outcomes of these arguments, Homo naledi underscores that human ancestry in the Middle Pleistocene was vastly more intricate and diverse than previously conceived. It shows that diminutive brain groups weren't inevitably relegated to obscurity, but could flourish, adjust, and potentially exhibit actions we've typically linked to the expansive brains of present-day Homo sapiens. The enigma surrounding Homo naledi continues to evolve. With the rising star cave potentially harboring additional revelations. Further digs are on the horizon, and teams are probing other sections of the cave to locate more naledi fossils, ideally in settings that illuminate their daily existence, diet, and environmental engagements. Currently, Homo naledi ranks among the most puzzling branches of our human kin. It emerged against all odds in a configuration that defied expectations and nevertheless secured a foothold in a landscape increasingly occupied by bigger-brained, more intellectually capable hominins. The duration of its endurance and the factors behind its disappearance stay shrouded. The endurance of Homo floresiensis for a minimum of 650,000 years on Flores Island and Homo naledi for at least 100,000 years in southern Africa, both sporting brains no bigger than an orange, challenges core assumptions about human origins. How could groups with such compact brains endure so extensively amid landscapes ever more ruled by bigger-brained hominins? By the era of Homo floresiensis and Homo naledi, Homo heidelbergensis had developed brains averaging 1,200 cubic centimeters and wielded advanced lithic implements while mastering fire throughout large swaths of Africa, Europe, and Western Asia. Homo erectus, with roughly 900 cubic centimeters brains, had thrived broadly for over 1,000,000 years. Proto-Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, their brains nearing or surpassing 1,400 cubic centimeters, were starting to arise and spread into fresh domains. Against this backdrop, the longevity of small-brained forms appears nearly contradictory. Like evolution conducting parallel trials, one pushing toward progressively larger intellects, the other proving that such expansion wasn't essential for sustained viability. The simplest reason for Homo floresiensis's endurance points to geographic separation. Flores, an island cut off from mainland Asia and nearby islands by vast ocean straits, posed tough obstacles even in Ice Age periods when seas dropped to their minimum. This seclusion allowed floresiensis to avoid head-on rivalry with bigger rivals such as Homo erectus or Homo sapiens over food, land, or partners. The island supported a distinct biological community, complete with its own hurdles and prospects, and floresiensis adapted precisely to those conditions. There, a compact build proved beneficial instead of burdensome, since tinier frames needed fewer calories, and provisions were scarce. The dwarf elephants that floresiensis pursued or foraged from were themselves outcomes of island miniaturization, with the whole habitat tuned to the limits of island life, provided no bigger humans made it ashore. Floresiensis could flourish in its specialized role, free from the intense rivalry that could spell doom elsewhere. Homo naledi's situation is trickier, given that southern Africa lacked the isolation of Flores. Naledi inhabited a landmass shared with Homo heidelbergensis and early Homo sapiens, species boasting bigger brains and likely superior mental skills. Still, Naledi persisted for no less than 100,000 years, perhaps even more, and managed to share space with them without quick elimination. Perhaps Naledi carved out a separate ecological slot, one with little overlap in areas or sustenance sources favored by bulkier hominins.
Discoveries of Naledi remain solely in cavern networks, especially in remote, hard-to-reach sections, hint that this group specialized in habitats shunned or underutilized by others. Such underground spaces bring perks as dwellings, especially amid areas with extreme outdoor temperature swings or lurking dangers from beasts. They shield against weather, guard against massive predators, and maintain a steadier inner climate, unlike the variable plains or woodlands above. Should Naledi have dwelled extensively in caves, not merely as brief refuges, but as steady homes or burial sites, it could have honed a range of habits and traits suited to underground realms where bigger-brained kinds felt uneasy. Traits like climbing prowess, indicated by shoulder and hand features paired with endurance for extended treks, revealed in foot morphology, equipped Naledi ideally for traversing the intricate, multi-level mazes of caves, shifting seamlessly from ground level to depths below. Beyond that, a key element in the longevity of small brain groups might just be that cranial capacity isn't the sole gauge of adaptive success. Endurance hinges on a web of influences: physical scale, energy use, breeding speed, group dynamics, flexibility amid shifts in surroundings, and plain chance. A compact-brained population with rapid reproduction, varied feeding habits, and knack for tough terrains could edge out a bulkier one demanding heavier inputs, slower offspring production, and poorer adjustment to flux. From an evolutionary angle, it's less about raw cleverness and more about which lineage spawns the greatest number of heirs, and those outcomes don't always align. We should also note that the smarts needed to get by in typical settings aren't as intense as we'd guess, viewing from our high-tech vantage today. Throughout much of hominin history, the trials our forebears tackled were direct and tangible: sourcing meals, dodging threats, sustaining ties, nurturing young, mapping routes. These demand cleverness, yes, but not always the abstract deduction, foresight over years, or emblematic thinking defining today's us. A modest brain, if neatly structured and streamlined, could handle such demands just fine, especially with evolved tactics offsetting any shortfall. Take tool-making. It doesn't demand enormous neural mass. Crows craft and employ implements using brains under 20 grams, all without dexterous hands or the precise hold primates use for intricate handling. A bird like the crow can bend a wire into a hook to fish out snacks from a tight container, so it's hard to argue that an early human ancestor with a 500 cubic centimeter brain and primate-style fingers couldn't craft a reliable stone implement. The evidence from Homo naledi and Homo floresiensis shows they possessed the hand dexterity for precise handling, meaning tool production was likely within their reach, even if they didn't create the diverse, location-specific assortments that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens fashioned back then. Mastering fire, too, doesn't demand high-level smarts after the initial methods are grasped. Managing flames mostly involves keeping them alive by adding wood, shielding them from gusts and downpours, and transporting them safely. Abilities that spread through watching and copying. No fancy speech or conceptual teaching required. Since Homo erectus handled fire around 800,000 years back with a smaller brain than those of Neanderthals or Homo sapiens, there's little doubt that Naledi or Floresiensis could have managed it too, provided they had the right resources and the know-how. What these small brain groups might have missed, and what could have sealed their doom, was the mental agility and creativity that let bigger-brained kinds adjust to fast-shifting surroundings. From 300,000 to 40,000 years ago, the world saw wild weather swings with frozen epochs and mild thaws trading off over spans of tens of thousands of years. Every climatic flip altered plant cover, wildlife numbers, and supplies of water, plus other essentials, putting inflexible species in peril of dying out. Our kind, Homo sapiens, leveraged its hefty brain, intricate group dynamics, and skill for symbolic reasoning to invent fresh tools, tweak pursuit tactics, and restructure communities amid the turmoil. Neanderthals, for all their brain power, proved less adaptable and vanished as weather turned and we pushed into their domains. For Homo naledi and Homo floresiensis, that same rigidity in thinking could have been their downfall. If they were tuned to particular habitats, naledi to cavern systems, floresiensis to isolated isles, they might have endured while conditions held steady. But once those settings shifted, their adaptation choices narrowed. And should the disruption hit hard, wiping out became unavoidable. Naturally, this is guesswork, as fossils capture only skeletons and artifacts, not habits or intellect. Still, it aligns with patterns seen in how niche-adapted creatures fare during ecological chaos. So explaining their persistence isn't straightforward. Homo floresiensis hung on thanks to its remote island refuge, dodging rivals. Homo naledi might have persisted by filling a slot overlooked by bulkier-brained rivals. Both prove that compact brains didn't bar extended existence, not in favorable setups anyway. In the end, though, they couldn't match the inventive resilience and versatility of Homo sapiens, a lineage unbound by one habitat or routine, ready to overhaul itself repeatedly to weather any global challenge. Throughout much of the last century, experts saw human origins as Homo sapiens arising in Africa, before fanning out worldwide, supplanting every other hominin without mixing genes. Dubbed the recent African origin or, quote, "4 idea," it drew backing from bones indicating the first full-bodied modern folks in Africa, circa 300,000 years ago, plus 1980s DNA work on mitochondria, linking today's people to a shared African foremother from 150,000 to 200,000 years prior. Simple, tidy, and vivid, we popped up in a single spot, ventured forth, and wherever we landed, we edged out the older forms, emerging as Homo's lone holdout. Yet for all its appeal, the framework fell short, or at least needed refining. Doubts surfaced in 2010 when scientists mapping the Neanderthal genetic code spotted an oddity upon aligning it with DNA from today's diverse groups globally. Researchers examining the data noticed that people outside Africa, such as those in Europe, Asia, the Americas, and Australia, possessed traces of Neanderthal DNA, amounting to about 1 to 4% of their overall genetic makeup, whereas individuals from sub-Saharan Africa showed almost none. This distribution could only be explained by past mating between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, likely occurring in areas like the Middle East or southern Europe, some time after Homo sapiens ventured out of Africa, but prior to their dispersal across other continents. The mixing wasn't widespread and likely stemmed from limited interactions spanning a few millennia. Yet it embedded a lasting genetic mark in the DNA of billions of contemporary humans. Uncovering Neanderthal sequences in today's people marked a breakthrough, though it was merely the starting point. Sequencing the DNA from a Denisovan fingerbone, unearthed in Siberia, revealed that this archaic group's genetic material also lingers in present-day humans, albeit with a distinct pattern compared to Neanderthal contributions. Groups like
Melanesians, indigenous Australians, and certain Southeast Asian and Pacific Island communities harbor 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA, a notably larger share than the Neanderthal input in Eurasian populations. This indicates that as Homo sapiens pushed eastward across Asia, they crossed paths with Denisovans and intermingled, mirroring the earlier unions with Neanderthals to the west. The elevated Denisovan presence in Melanesians implies more substantial interbreeding in Southeast Asia and Oceania, perhaps due to denser Denisovan groups in those regions or prolonged contact periods. Deeper scrutiny of the Denisovan genome uncovered an even greater revelation. These individuals seem to be products of hybridization themselves, with the DNA from their own line, plus Neanderthals, and at least one other unidentified ancient human group that branched off from the primary hominin path much earlier. Dubbed a super-archaic or _5_ lineage at times, this mystery population might represent a lingering Homo erectus band or offspring of Homo heidelbergensis that stayed sequestered in Eastern Asia as human evolution advanced elsewhere. Regardless of their identity, they mated with Denisovans, and via those unions, fragments of their genes filtered into today's humans, especially in Melanesia and Australia. Consequently, living individuals bear hereditary elements from groups absent from known fossils, ancestries detectable solely through faint blended DNA echoes persisting across millennia of intermixing. Such hybridization extended beyond Homo sapiens and archaic humans. Neanderthal and Denisovan genomes alike bear signs of crossbreeding between them. In 2018, scientists identified a bone from Denisova Cave belonging to an adolescent girl with a Neanderthal mother and Denisovan father, a direct first-generation hybrid that underscored how routine these interspecies encounters were whenever groups met. Her survival implies that such offspring were not only viable but potentially capable of reproduction, rendering the divides between human species far more fluid than classic biological classifications imply. Inside Africa, the cradle of Homo sapiens evolution, genomic studies similarly reveal ancient interbreeding with archaic groups. Scans of current African DNA have pinpointed chromosomal pieces unmatched to any recognized hominin branch, likely acquired from populations that split from Homo sapiens forebears hundreds of thousands of years back. These elusive ghost groups remain unfound in fossils, although Homo naledi, dated recently and located in southern Africa, emerges as a possible match. Should Homo naledi have mingled with early Homo sapiens, it could account for some of the rich genetic variation in modern Africans. Confirming this, however, demands DNA. Recovery from naledi remains a challenge so far unmet because of degradation in hot, humid environments. The archaic genes, passed to modern humans from Neanderthals and Denisovans, aren't scattered haphazardly or mere inert relics of bygone liaisons. Instead, many enduring ones cluster in genomic zones influencing immunity, pigmentation and hair features, and energy processing. It indicates that these genetic elements underwent positive selection, offering key benefits to Homo sapiens groups as they ventured into unfamiliar territories and confronted unfamiliar illnesses. Neanderthals, having inhabited Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, had developed immune responses tailored to the local pathogens in those areas. Upon the arrival of Homo sapiens and subsequent intermixing, portions of those immunity-related genes transferred over. Individuals today with European or Asian ancestry possess Neanderthal-derived variants in the HLA complex, a vital system for detecting and combating infections. and research demonstrates these variants boost defenses against specific viruses and bacteria. In a parallel case, the EPAS1 gene form that contemporary Tibetans received from Denisovans enables more effective oxygen utilization in thin air at elevation, minimizing altitude-related illnesses and permitting habitation and labor in highland zones where typical humans would falter. This particular variant is virtually non-existent among sea-level dwellers, pointing to intense selection in Tibet's mountainous regions, where carriers enjoyed a clear edge in survival compared to non-carriers. In regions like Melanesia and Australia, Denisovan genetic contributions tie into immune capabilities and, potentially, to physiological tweaks for underwater activities and prolonged breath retention. While the links to the latter remain preliminary and demand more investigation, the pattern of archaic genes delivering adaptive edges aligns with fundamental evolutionary principles. As groups migrate to novel settings, they encounter pressures that prioritize particular characteristics. Any genetic diversity, aiding adaptation to these challenges, gets amplified through natural selection. Mingling with archaic humans who had long acclimated to such locales over vast timescales offered Homo sapiens a rapid path to adjustment, granting useful alleles in just one generation instead of relying on de novo mutations across millennia. This mechanism, termed adaptive introgression, finds solid support in various organisms, from wolves and coyotes to Darwin's finches, and it evidently contributed substantially to Homo sapiens' triumphs in evolution. The genetic evidence paints a portrait of a lineage far from isolated or pristine, but richly intertwined with fellow human branches, via a network of crossings that crossed continents over tens of millennia. Species divides weren't impenetrable barriers, but flexible borders, and interactions among human populations weren't invariably aggressive or rivalrous. At times, they involved collaboration, or sufficient tolerance for mating to happen, with hybrid descendants thriving, breeding, and transmitting their blended inheritance onward. The notion of Homo sapiens overtaking other humans via straightforward rivalry overlooks the nuances. Reality unfolded in a more intricate, protracted, and chaotic manner than earlier theories suggested. We didn't merely supplant the Neanderthals and Denisovans. We integrated them. Through this fusion, we evolved into a novel entity, a blended form bearing the inherited traces of diverse ancestries, forming a patchwork of the human phylogeny instead of a straight solitary trunk. Approximately 40,000 years ago, a shift commenced. The planet, populated for hundreds of thousands of years by various humankinds in separate domains with sporadic meetings, began to lose its diversity. Neanderthals, masters of Europe and Western Asia for over 300,000 years, faded from their long-standing domains. Their numbers shrank into dwindling pockets in southern Spain, the Balkans, and the Caucasus. Denisovans, whose territories once extended from Siberia through Southeast Asia and perhaps farther, yield no remains younger than 40,000 years, implying their own downturn. Homo floresiensis, enduring on Flores Island for hundreds of thousands of years, drops from the archaeological record around 50,000 years ago, although hints indicate possible brief persistence. By 30,000 years ago, and definitively by 10,000 years ago, a single human form endured. Homo sapiens expanded to all landmasses save Antarctica, the lone remnant of a once vibrant genus. Among these vanishings, the Neanderthal's extinction stands as the most thoroughly recorded. This is largely due to the abundant fossils Neanderthals bequeathed, as well as the fact that their final communities coexisted in both space and time with Homo sapiens, allowing archaeologists to examine their encounters or absences through material remains. Traces of these late Neanderthal groups appear in various locations throughout southern Europe, with the most recent ones, from about 39,000 years ago, discovered in Gibraltar's caves and elsewhere on the Iberian Peninsula. At that stage, these Neanderthals existed in tiny, disconnected bands, divided by rugged mountains and unforgiving landscapes. Excavations indicate that their numbers were already scattered and waning prior to the substantial influx of Homo sapiens. For over a century, scholars have argued about the reasons behind the Neanderthals' demise, and it's clear that no isolated cause suffices. Instead, multiple strains converged to overwhelm a group already teetering on the brink. Among them was shifting climate. From 50,000 to 40,000 years ago, the environment swung wildly through alternating cold snaps and thaws, unsettling habitats and compelling humans and wildlife alike to adjust swiftly or migrate. Neanderthals, finely tuned to icy glacial conditions, likely faltered during warmer spells, which relocated the herds of big game they pursued and disrupted supplies of vegetation and fresh water. Rivalry with Homo sapiens factored in too, although teasing out the precise dynamics from artifacts alone proves challenging. As Homo sapiens migrated into Europe, they introduced varied implements, advanced pursuit methods, and, likely, broader, more intricate social ties that enabled long-range planning and better resource distribution. Should Homo sapiens have outpaced Neanderthals in capturing shared quarry or in harnessing temporary bounties and stockpiling for scarcities? Such advantages might have steadily whittled away Neanderthal viability, all without outright clashes. Nothing in the record points to battles or wholesale slaughters between the groups, implying the takeover unfolded gradually via population shifts. Homo sapiens expanded as Neanderthal numbers dwindled. Illness could have contributed as well, albeit this remains the haziest element in the discussion, given that pathogens rarely fossilize. Encounters between long-segregated peoples often unleash deadly microbe swaps, a pattern echoed in historical cases, like European ailments decimating native groups in the Americas and Oceania. If Homo sapiens brought ailments, Neanderthals couldn't resist. Even occasional meetings might have sparked outbreaks that slashed their ranks and sapped resilience against further stresses. Since Neanderthals and Homo sapiens mingled genetically, implying sufficient proximity for bugs to pass, yet confirming such outbreaks' scale or impact on extinction eludes today's data. Crucially, perhaps the key element was merging. Genomic studies reveal Neanderthals didn't just fade away but blended into the burgeoning Homo sapiens masses via crossbreeding, with Neanderthal clusters contracting and splintering. Meetings with Homo sapiens more often led to unions than rivalries. Gradually, these remnant Neanderthal pockets got outnumbered genetically by the vastly superior Homo sapiens throng. Known as genetic swamping, this blending demands neither aggression nor rivalry, pure demographics at work. As a minor lineage mixes with a dominant one, its traits thin out and merge into the bigger pool until, after successive generations, no one retains a pure enough heritage to qualify as the source species. The Denisovans fade-out aligns on a comparable schedule, but sifting the specifics is tougher owing to the scant skeletal evidence. Their latest bones clock in at roughly 40,000 years old, with zero signs they lingered longer. Genetic evidence indicates that Denisovan groups were distributed widely throughout Asia, with some lingering in certain areas beyond others. Similar to Neanderthals, Denisovans mixed with Homo sapiens, leaving their genetic legacy in contemporary groups, especially in Melanesia and Tibet. There, the beneficial features from Denisovan genes proved advantageous enough to undergo positive selection. The presence of Denisovan DNA in these far-flung populations points to repeated interactions between Denisovans and Homo sapiens, forming a widespread network of exchanges and genetic mixing as we expanded across Asia, isolated on the island of Flores. Homo floresiensis might have endured longer than Neanderthals or Denisovans, depending on interpretations of the dating. The most recent fossils come from about 60,000 years ago. Yet tools akin to those crafted by Floresiensis appear in strata from 50,000 years ago. Certain scholars propose the species could have lasted until roughly 12,000 years ago, drawing on indigenous folklore and accounts of diminutive human-like beings from historical sources. Should Homo floresiensis have made it into the Holocene, it would represent the final non-sapiens human lineage to vanish, fading just millennia before the onset of farming and settled societies. The cause of its demise, whether Homo sapiens reaching Flores, volcanic activity, shifting climates, or a mix of these, stays unresolved. Homo erectus offers further enigma. Its latest fossils hail from approximately 236,000 years ago, anchoring the species in the Middle Pleistocene. Yet the absence of newer specimens doesn't confirm extinction then. Gaps in the fossil evidence are well known, and it's quite plausible that H. erectus persisted far longer, especially in underrepresented cave sites or less explored territories. Without additional discoveries or successful DNA recovery from known bones, the timing of its extinction stays unresolved. What stands out across these stories is how the span from 50,000 to 30,000 years ago marked a pivotal shift in our shared history. That's when the rich variety within the genus Homo, sustained for 2 million years, dwindled to just one survivor. The factors driving this decline differed by lineage and locale, but the unifying element was Homo sapiens' outward push through rivalry, illness, environmental shifts, or integration. All other human forms we met ultimately faded, bequeathing just fossil hints and scattered DNA snippets in today's human blueprints. This grand fade-out wasn't an abrupt disaster erasing several kinds overnight. Instead, it stretched over many millennia. Once complete, the planet's human tapestry had transformed utterly from anything in the prior 2 million years. For the first instance since Homo's dawn, a single human form remained. Why we, Homo sapiens, outlasted every other human branch poses a core riddle in evolutionary anthropology, and one tough to pin down definitively. At first glance, nothing in early Homo sapiens screams clear dominance over the contemporaries from 300,000 years back. Our average brain volume of about 1,400 cubic centimeters wasn't the biggest. Neanderthals averaged 100 cubic centimeters more. Still, they vanished as we endured. We weren't the burliest either. Neanderthals boasted sturdier frames, denser bones, and bigger muscles, traits ideal for close-quarters fights or tackling big game. Nor were we the best suited to cold. Neanderthals' compact builds and broad nasal cavities evolved precisely for Ice Age Europe. We weren't alone in symbolic expression, crafting tools, mastering fire, or group hunting, as digs at Neanderthal, Denisovan, and perhaps even Homo heidelbergensis sites reveal. What set Homo sapiens apart, and likely fueled our triumph was a blend of qualities fostering unmatched mental and social adaptability, absent in rivals. Leading among them was language, or rather, a richer version. More intricate, self-referential, and adept at expressing intangible concepts than the communicative systems of Neanderthals or Denisovans. Proof for this comes indirectly since language leaves no fossils, yet it's backed by physical traits like the vocal tract structure and the updated FOXP2 gene, plus archaeological finds revealing that Homo sapiens crafted artwork, ornaments, and symbolic items much sooner and in much wider assortment than other hominins. Such advanced communication enabled our groups to synchronize efforts across broader regions, exchange details on supplies and threats more effectively, and pass down traditions across generations with higher accuracy. Another vital element was social setup. Neanderthals stuck to modest bands, likely 30 to 50 people at most, with ties confined mostly to nearby areas, whereas Homo sapiens formed expansive, linked communities that supported commerce, partnerships, and partner swaps over vast spans. Traces of these far-reaching exchange systems show up in digs from 100,000 years back, including tools from stones quarried hundreds of kilometers off and decorative shells hauled from remote origins. These connections gave Homo sapiens broader resource pools, boosted genetic variety via unions with far-off kin, and the option to summon support during shortages or clashes. Creativity and flexibility played huge roles too. Our populations excelled at inventing fresh tools and tactics to handle shifting surroundings. Scarce big game. They turned to angling, mollusk collection, and chasing nimble small animals. No good stone for implements. They turned to bone, horn, timber, and alternatives. Harsh weather wiped out usual eats. They relocated and tweaked hunting-gathering to match local offerings. This nimbleness differed sharply from the Neanderthals' rigid Mousterian kit, which barely evolved over millennia, or the niche-tuned ways of Homo floresiensis, who flourished in their niche habitat, but faltered when it altered. It's also likely that Homo sapiens edged ahead via bigger numbers and faster breeding. Heftier groups weather storms like habitat shifts, illnesses, or rivalries better as they bounce back from hits while keeping reproduction going. Should our bands have been bigger and thicker set than Neanderthal or Denisovan ones and bred swifter, then even without per-person smarts surpassing theirs, our raw volume would gradually shift the odds our way. That's particularly so if mixing happened, as the minority genes would blend and fade into the majority pool, a shift needing no edge beyond our greater count. Contrary to common tales, Homo sapiens didn't win by brute force or targeted wipeouts. Digs yield no mass graves, no Neanderthal remains marked by organized Homo sapiens attacks, nor hints that other hominins vanished from battles. The takeover unfolded quietly and steadily across millennia, blending resource rivalry, genetic overrun via hybridization, and the gradual fade of sparse, scattered bands. Sometimes their demise stemmed less from our pushes and more from failing to cope with the shifts we handled well. By about 30,000 years ago, Homo sapiens alone remained among humans, ushering in an unmatched era in the prior 2 million years of hominin history. A globe with just one human type. This wasn't some ethical victory. Evolution doesn't judge good or bad. It was merely the result. A tangle of genes, actions, settings, and luck. We endured not from any fated path. It wasn't due to any innate superiority on our part. Rather, Homo sapiens endured thanks to a fortunate mix of characteristics that aligned perfectly with the demands of the late Pleistocene era, staving off extinction. Yet this endurance came at a steep price, a profound reduction in variety. As Homo erectus, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, Homo naledi, and those elusive ghost lineages faded away, humankind forfeited a vast array of body types, ways of thinking, societal practices, and survival tactics. The Homo genus, once boasting species from just 1 meter in height to almost 2 meters, with brain sizes spanning 400 cubic centimeters to 1,500 cubic centimeters, thriving from tropical isles to icy tundras, and excelling as arboreal specialists or long-distance pursuers, dwindled to one lone species marked by fairly limited differences. Within Homo sapiens, genetic variety stands out as strikingly meager when set against other big mammals. This stems from severe population squeezes and the reality that every current human traces back to a modest group that ventured out of Africa roughly 70,000 to 50,000 years ago. Such scant diversity carries weighty repercussions today. It leaves a species more susceptible to illnesses, shifts in climate, and further dangers, since there's scant genetic fodder for evolution to draw on amid altering circumstances. The reality that non-African humans all harbor bits of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA offers a modest offset, injecting extra variation that might otherwise be absent. Still, it falls short of compensating for the wholesale erasure of humanity's broad genetic tapestry from 300,000 years back. In truth, we Homo sapiens form a biologically diminished group, persisting not through strength or breadth, but through sheer fortune in dodging disasters that could lay bare our frailties so far. Another toll of emerging as the last one standing is a profound sense of isolation on an existential level. For nearly 2 million years, the Homo genus shared the globe with fellow travelers. Other human varieties dotted across the landscape, carving out their existences, tailoring to their surroundings, and devising unique approaches to life's endurance test. Their coexistence underscored humanity's multiplicity, diverse paths to humanness, with evolution's trajectory still branching wide. But now, for the first instance in Homo's chronicle, there's just one response to the query of human essence, and that response is us. We alone carry forward a heritage brimming with untapped potentials. How we steward or fritter away that legacy is yet to unfold. The Neanderthals and Denisovans didn't fade into oblivion, as extinction is typically pictured. No total erasure, with mere bones and artifacts as traces of their tenure. They bequeathed something profoundly personal and lasting, slivers of their genetic code, interlaced into the DNA of virtually every living individual with roots beyond sub-Saharan Africa. These snippets aren't inert souvenirs or useless evolutionary cargo. Quite a few function as active genes, subtly steering human physiology in tangible fashion, from bolstering defenses against invaders to altering hue of skin, acclimating to high elevations, or even tipping odds for specific ailments. The specters of vanished humankin don't lurk in dim caverns or decayed skeletons. They dwell within us, vibrant and impactful, molding how our forms interact with the environment. Neanderthal input prevails most broadly and has undergone the deepest scrutiny. About 1 to 4% of the genetic makeup in folks of European, Asian, or Native American descent derives from Neanderthals. A modest fraction, yet encompassing millions of DNA base pairs scattered over thousands of genes. These Neanderthal-sourced segments don't distribute uniformly through the genome. They cluster in key zones, especially those tied to immunity, dermal and follicular features, and energy processing. The HLA genes, integral to the major histocompatibility complex and vital for spotting threats and triggering defenses, encompass multiple Neanderthal-inherited forms that thrive in contemporary groups. Take HLA-A02. It appears in over half of Europeans and bolsters defenses against select viruses, a stark illustration of Neanderthal legacies, aiding their heirs' endurance. Traits of skin and hair provide another realm where Neanderthal heritage shows clear imprints. Genes governing complexion, lock curl, and proneness to spots all bear signs of Neanderthal blending. Moreover, certain variants inherited from Neanderthals are connected to paler skin shades and reddish hair, features that likely offered benefits in the dim conditions of northern Europe's higher latitudes, where the skin's vitamin D production is not as effective. The prevalence of these characteristics among groups that have inhabited such northern regions for many millennia indicates that Neanderthal DNA was favored through natural selection, aiding Homo sapiens in thriving in habitats unfamiliar to their forebears from Africa. Neanderthal influences also extend to metabolic processes and how fat is stored, especially concerning lipid metabolism and resilience to chilly conditions. Particular genetic elements from Neanderthals in contemporary Europeans influence where fat accumulates on the body and how efficiently calories are turned into fuel amid food shortages or harsh winters. Such adaptations prove vital in the Ice Age era, with far colder climates than now, where enduring lean times through extended cold spells could determine survival. Curiously, these very genetic elements that aided endurance in frigid, food-poor settings today correlate with heightened chances of metabolic issues like type 2 diabetes and obesity among people leading inactive lives surrounded by plentiful calories. The genetic inheritance from Denisovans affects fewer individuals overall, yet in specific groups, it surpasses the Neanderthal input in scale. Populations such as Melanesians, Aboriginal Australians, and certain Southeast Asian communities possess 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA. For Tibetans and Sherpas, one standout Denisovan gene has profoundly shaped their high-elevation living. The EPAS1 gene, which controls red blood cell formation under low oxygen conditions, appears in a unique version among Tibetans that's rare elsewhere on land. This form helps sustain steady blood oxygen without overproducing red cells, which at altitude can thicken the blood, raise stroke risks, and cause chronic mountain sickness. Its origin from Denisovans who occupied those elevated areas tens of thousands of years back stands as a prime instance of adaptive introgression, a scenario where mating with an archaic human group yielded quick, tangible benefits for survival. Additional Denisovan genes tie into immune responses, although their precise roles and perks are under ongoing investigation. Certain experts propose that Denisovan DNA might explain the extraordinary breath-holding skills of the Bahau in the Philippines, who free-dive beyond 70 meters to catch fish. Though the supporting genetic data is still tentative and needs further research, confirmation would highlight yet another way archaic human genetics has fueled today's wide array of human adaptations. Remarkably, even in Africa, where Neanderthal and Denisovan traces are mostly missing, signs point to mixing with other ancient human groups. Analyses of DNA in current African peoples have spotted fragments that don't align with any recognized hominin lines, likely stemming from unions with groups that split from Homo sapiens forebears hundreds of thousands of years prior. Dubbed ghost lineages, since no matching fossils exist yet, possible sources include Homo naledi, or lingering offspring of Homo heidelbergensis, confined to African pockets. The persistence of these ancient genes in today's African DNA implies that such interspecies encounters weren't isolated incidents, like those between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals in Europe and Asia, but a repeated theme across human history, one fostering genetic diversity to speed up environmental adjustments. These archaic contributions go further than isolated features, shedding light on human health and illness patterns. Neanderthal-sourced genes linked to elevated risks for autoimmune diseases, depression, and similar widespread ailments, whereas some confer defenses against infections or bolster tolerance for ecological pressures. That a single variant might prove helpful in its original setting, yet detrimental today, underscores how evolution prioritizes immediate fitness over enduring vitality or comfort. Evolution favors reproductive achievement in the particular environments where a group resides. A genetic trait that aided Neanderthals in enduring the frigid conditions of Ice Age Europe might yield unexpected drawbacks for contemporary humans, dwelling in climate-controlled dwellings, consuming packaged meals, and dealing with pressures absent 40,000 years back. Archaic DNA lingering in today's human genomes muddies the notion of what defines Homo sapiens. Since individuals outside Africa harbor Neanderthal DNA, Melanesians possess Denisovan genes, and Africans include contributions from unidentified ancient groups. The concept of a pristine, untainted Homo sapiens bloodline proves illusory. All of us represent mixtures, bearing hereditary elements from various human kinds, and the divides among those kinds were far less sharp than the Linnaean classification scheme implies. That Neanderthals and Denisovans could mate with Homo sapiens to yield viable progeny indicates the reproductive barriers, usually marking distinct species, remain partial, and the split among these lines, though genuine, lack totality. Such insights carry deep ramifications for our views on human origins and selfhood. Rather than a tale of one dominant type arising from Africa to dominate globally, it's a narrative of interaction, sharing, blending, and reciprocal impact. Neanderthals and Denisovans didn't vanish outright, they evolved, their genetic legacy enduring in attenuated yet functional states, continuing to influence the physiology of their heirs. Viewed this way, they're not wholly gone. They endure, inscribed within the cells of countless billions, forming an enduring, inseparable element of humanity. The specters in our genetic code aren't mere illusions, they're forebears. Their inheritance manifests not in rock or remains, but in the vital, animated forms of all who bear their traits. 300,000 years passed. The planet teemed with a richness it won't witness anew. Not teeming with billions from one kind as now, but brimming with variety. Various human forms claiming distinct planetary niches, each suited to its habitat, each tackling existence through unique strategies. Across Europe, forebears of Neanderthals honed skills for glacial terrains, pursuing woolly mammoths and constructing refugees from bones and pelts of those beasts. In Africa, nascent Homo sapiens started diverging from Homo heidelbergensis roots, innovating implements and social structures. In Asia, Denisovans adjusted to harsh variances. Certain groups developed to flourish amid the sparse oxygen of Tibetan plateaus, while others ventured southward to milder zones. On Flores Island, diminutive humans pursued dwarf elephants, traversing a realm where compactness conferred benefits. Within southern African caverns, Homo naledi engaged in enigmatic rituals with the deceased, transporting corpses into profound recesses for motives that elude full comprehension. These weren't botched trials or stalled paths in evolution. They were thriving lineages, each boasting hundreds of millennia of endurance, each fostering distinct customs, practices, and worldviews. They crafted artifacts, harnessed flames, nurtured offspring, interred the departed. They gazed at identical constellations, sensed the identical sunlight, endured appetite and chill, dread and awe. They embodied humanity in all essential aspects, despite physical and neural variances from us. Their absence today doesn't lessen their essence. It merely underscores that endurance doesn't gauge value, and vanishing doesn't pronounce defeat. The chronicle of these 9 types weaves in threads of sorrow, too, as Homo erectus faded from Java, as final Neanderthals perished in Gibraltar's grottos, as Homo floresiensis dissolved from Flores, the globe grew slightly less varied, less captivating, more monotonous. Every such loss sheared a limb from humanity's familial arbor, an unrealized potential, a mode of humanness now erased by eras. The hereditary variety in current humans echoes faintly the abundance when Homo genus crested. And the societal variety, the varied tongues, fabrication techniques, artistic and ceremonial methods, communal arrangements, has wholly evaporated, save for subtle traces etched in lithic and skeletal relics. Insights from unearthing these alternate human forms reveal evolution, as no straight ascent but a dense knotted shrub, limbs sprouting unpredictably. Some flourishing briefly before curtailment, others lingering to spawn fresh offshoots. Humanity's developmental arc never inexorably aimed to yield Homo sapiens. The path of human evolution could have diverged in countless directions. In many such parallel timelines, Neanderthals might have endured while our kind faded, or Denisovans could have emerged as the prevailing group, or Earth might have remained populated by various human lines coexisting peacefully. That just a single lineage outlasted the rest stems from sheer accident, random occurrences, and ecological forces that might have unfolded in entirely different patterns. Our existence isn't proof of our superiority. It's a testament to our good fortune. Broader mysteries linger beyond any one group's fate. If intelligence can't be gauged solely by brain volume, then how should we define it? If compact brain groups like Homo floresiensis and Homo naledi endured for hundreds of thousands of years, crafting implements, mastering flames, and perhaps even pondering symbols, what does that reveal about the link between mental capacity and neural anatomy? If gene swapping among diverse human forms was routine and advantageous, supplying resilient traits that endure in today's people, what insights does that offer on species divisions and the essence of our shared humanity? These aren't mere intellectual puzzles. They probe the core of biology, evolutionary processes, and our very humanness. Their echoes resonate today and tomorrow. As the only surviving member of the Homo genus, we've stood solitary for over 10,000 years, a mere sliver of our 2 million-year heritage. During this span, we've erected societies, pioneered farming, birthed artistry, writing, and knowledge, and reshaped the globe like nothing before. Yet we've also wiped out myriad other life forms, disrupted weather patterns, and forged inventions that, if mishandled, could spell our doom. Being the final human variant doesn't shield us from vanishing. It warns that our end would leave no kin to step in, no sideline twig on the evolutionary tree to sprout anew. The trial would conclude. Maybe that's the deepest takeaway from the saga of those 9 forms. Variety isn't some vague virtue. It's a safeguard against disaster, insurance for an uncertain tomorrow.
Back when several human types roamed, losing one didn't doom the whole narrative. Alternatives thrived in varied realms, tuned to unique habitats, ready to press on. Today, it's solely us, and should we falter, no contingency exists. The departure of Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis, Homo naledi, and the rest has rendered us biologically thinner and profoundly alone. We're the lone stewards of a legacy, once brimming with potential, though they're not wholly vanished. Within every non-African descended individual today, Neanderthal DNA lingers, quietly shaping immunity, pigmentation, and myriad features. Up in Tibet's peaks, Denisovan heritage aids high-altitude respiration, a legacy from a kin lost 40,000 years back. In Africa, unidentified spectral groups etched their influence into our genes, fueling the variety that propelled our spread and endurance. These phantoms endure, threaded through our essence, a nod that we're no pristine stock, but a blend fused from the many human strains that once shared this world beneath identical skies. 300,000 years past, atop some ridge, you could have spotted wisps from a Neanderthal hearth afar, or caught echoes of Homo naledi traversing adjacent caverns, or spied the diminutive Homo floresiensis vanishing into the woods. The globe teemed with humans in the plural sense, and tomorrow lay vast, uncharted, ripe with options. These days, from that same vantage, only one human type persists, the distant haze from urban sprawls and plants, the noises a drone of engines and a lone kind conversing among itself. Our teeming world feels barren in human variety. If that void refills by our hand or successors remains unknown. Night falls heavy, stars unchanged from those Neanderthals beheld, from those that steered Homo erectus over lands, from those Homo naledi perhaps spied cave entrance framed. Earth spins steadily onward, unmoved by surface dwellers. Enduring, with a patience beyond any creature's grasp, peaks ascend and crumble. Streams etch fresh roots, woods sprout, blaze, and regrow. Throughout these vast changes, the tale of existence unfolds relentlessly, regardless of our presence or any specific embodiment. The 9 human species roaming the planet 300,000 years ago have vanished entirely. For most, their remains lie dispersed across cavern floors, stream edges, and buried strata, destined to surface through weathering, digs, or the gradual shift of continental plates. Yet, they existed once. They endured hardships, persisted through trials, formed bonds, and eventually perished. In the grand sweep of geologic eras, they briefly claimed the world as their own, no less than anyone else. They weren't defeats. They represented trials, diverse iterations of a core idea, alternative solutions to a universal inquiry. What defines humanity? And you, hearing these words today, inherit their enduring heritage. Within your cells, your genetic code, the architecture of your defenses against illness, the hue of your complexion, and how your form handles breathable air. Traces of their lives persist. You're not solely Homo sapiens. You're a tapestry, a vibrant repository of the broader human lineage, echoing vanished kin from before recorded time. Each inhalation you draw owes something to adaptations forged in alien frames amid landscapes forever lost to you under stresses beyond modern reckoning. The planet feels more subdued today than it did 300,000 years back, more hushed and somehow more isolated. No diverse voices remain beyond our own kind. No encounters with alternate humans on remote coasts or rugged trails.
No serendipitous meetings with those whose appearances, minds, and worldviews stemmed from separate paths of descent. We're solitary now, the sole surviving limb on a once lush arboreal network, brimming with potential. Our flourishing or decline, our proliferation across the globe, or abrupt erasure like the Neanderthals, rests entirely on our choices. Yet in this instant, you stand present, forged from 4 billion years of evolutionary progression. From aquatic origins and amphibious forms through primitive warm-blooded creatures, arboreal swingers and bipedal ancestors, to bearer of Neanderthal traits, Denisovan tweaks, and the collective insights of myriad forebears who endured to transmit their essence. You emerge from an unsevered lineage tracing to life's dawn. That link has held firm unbroken amid mass die-offs, disasters, climatic upheavals, and brushes with oblivion that might have severed it forever. Pause and absorb it all. Allow the narrative to resonate. The Neanderthals repose serenely in their rocky shelters, their skeletons fossilized over eons. Homo erectus took its final strides beside the Solo River, bequeathing no direct heirs. Still, that journey endures in preserved relics, poised for discovery. The Denisovans, enigmatic without clear visages, endure in the veins of Tibetans and Melanesians, their inheritance etched not in stoneworks but in hereditary strands. Homo floresiensis, those diminutive inhabitants of Flores, have faded though the isle holds their imprint. Local tales from island folk might whisper of ancient brushes from millennia past. Homo nalensi slumbers in shadowy vaults where it was unearthed. Whether it interred its kin deliberately or by chance remains a puzzle unsolved. But posing the query itself offers value, underscoring how antiquity brims with enigmas defying simple resolutions. The globe revolves steadily. Celestial bodies trace their arcs above. Land masses glide with unyielding patience. In some distant Whippock, another lineage might gaze upon us as we do upon Homo erectus. Pondering our essence, our daily rhythms are vanishing. They'll unearth our skeletons, artifacts, and urban remnants layered into the rock record. From such shards, they'll piece together our existence, mirroring our efforts with predecessors. They'll voice the queries we raise. Were they clever? Did speech bind them? Did they sense their isolation? For us, the response rings true. Yes, we comprehended it. Only we could, as the final remnants capable of inquiry. Though the 9 have departed, their chronicle lingers undimmed. It's inscribed in rock and relic, in skeletal frames and the twisting ladders of DNA, threading your every nucleus. It's etched in your cranium's contours, your fingers' framework, your body's vigilance against invaders. It's captured in the peaks, waterways, and hollows that sheltered them, and in the earth's steadfast endurance, surpassing all life forms, dominions, and convictions. Invoke the glacial epochs in your reflections, the ice sheet surging forth and withdrawing, oceans swelling and ebbing, woodlands yielding to savannas and reclaiming ground. Summon the early humans striding through your contemplations, erect and inquisitive, wielding flame and flint, grappling with riddles beyond their grasp, yet bequeathing them to offspring across ages until those puzzles arrived at your doorstep. You represent the solution they sought, though unaware of the puzzle at hand. You embody the outcome of an ancestral line enduring sufficiently to reflect on its past and ponder its significance. You signify the teeming world distilled to a single being, the lone remnant pondering the reason. Yet that very inquiry serves as the sole response available.
Sleep now. The tale concludes. The heavens persist. Our planet persists. And come dawn, should dawn arrive, the globe awaits to witness how you'll employ the legacy bestowed upon you. Sweet dreams.